Hello and welcome to Genealogy Gems podcast episode number 113. In this episode, I've got a really interesting interview for you with someone who has done what so many of us have wanted to do, but just haven't managed to do it yet. And that is publish a book about our family history. But this is no ordinary family history book that he's published, if there really is such a thing as an ordinary family history book. John Paul Godges is a professional magazine editor with a master's degree in journalism from University of California at Berkeley, and he set out to write a thoughtful, emotional, and comprehensive book filled with the stories of his family, from his ancestors all the way up to his living siblings. It's not only a fascinating read, but a wonderful example of what to strive for in writing your own family's history. And in this interview, I retrieve genealogy gems as well as writing gems that I hope that you're going to be able to apply to your own research and writings. John's going to share how he discovered that his siblings had dramatically varying views of growing up in the same family.
Yes, and we were 6 children within a span of 10 years, but even those 10 years, not a long time in genealogical perspective, right. It creates huge differences in perspectives.
And on the eve of their parents' 50th anniversary, the thought that was on all of their minds.
I saw that each of us, independently, was trying to figure out how this couple had managed to stay together all those years.
And then in going back and telling the stories of his ancestors, he challenges the notion that all immigrants had complete moral clarity on their immigration. And he shares the practical experience of doing the genealogical research to confirm the family stories.
And you know how painstaking a process that can be to be scrolling through these microfilms. You feel like you're on a ship yourself. It becomes rather nauseating.
That's a very good way to put it. John faced a lot of challenges in his research, as we all do, and he's going to explain why a passenger list that had been lost for so long in his family suddenly came to light, and how the reason for that might explain why you can't find the one that you're looking for.
I was on the island, on Ellis Island. I was calling my sister on a cell phone, looking at New York across the Hudson River, imagining what my great-grandfather had been envisioning at the time when, right in the heart of Lower Manhattan was Little Italy in its heyday, you could say, and imagining what he was going to go through and what he ultimately went through and how heart-wrenching that whole story was.
Then we really go deeper to find those gems that you can use to help you be successful in writing your family history. John shares what finally prompted him to put pen to paper, and then he shares his secrets for successfully writing a book about his own family history, how he stayed focused, how he got relatives to talk to him, and the questions that he used to draw out the real meat of the family story. You're going to get a lot out of this conversation. I know that I did. I started reading John's book called Oh Beautiful, An American Family in the 20th Century in late May, and I was so taken by it that I invited him to come meet me at the Southern California Genealogy Jamboree in Burbank, California in early June to record an interview, and he graciously agreed. So that is coming up later in the show.
I really appreciate you coming to a genealogy conference to meet up with me. Boy, after I started reading your book, I thought they need to put you on the schedule to be sharing this story, because you've done what so many of us strive to do, long to do, and so rarely do, which is you've actually put this down on paper, and you've got this compelling family history that you share in your book. It's called Oh Beautiful. Tell us, what prompted you to finally put pen to paper and capture this incredible story?
It was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary in 1999, and I have 5 brothers and sisters, and they gave me the task of compiling our anniversary tributes to them. I saw that each of us, independently, was trying to figure out how this couple had managed to stay together all those years.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking that, these tributes that each of us had written separately, independently, unaware of what everyone else had done, and yet still struggling with a same kind of a logical conundrum. How could two people who are so very different from each other in many ways remain together? I realized that those tributes were saying a lot about us as kids as well, because we are very different among the six of us.
Siblings all grow up in the same family, but they have a very different view of family history, don't they? And just the family dynamic of what was it like to grow up in your family?
Yes, yes. And we were 6 children within a span of 10 years. But even those 10 years, not a long time in genealogical perspective, right. It creates huge differences in perspectives. But I noticed that these tributes said a lot about us, because even though we are so different from my Oliver North brother to my Hillary Clinton sister and everyone in between and off the spectrum, we still are pretty tight-knit. And I started thinking about the reflections on my parents' 50 years, and then I started to recall the stories of my grandparents from both sides of the family and their very difficult decisions to immigrate to this country. We hold these myths of the noble immigrant stories. They were noble immigrants. I should say we hold these myths of our ancestors coming to this country to build a city on the hill. Mm-hmm. Very clear decision, filled with moral clarity and rectitude. There were ferocious arguments on both sides of the family about the decision to immigrate to America in the first place. And in one case, it provoked a divorce.
Wow.
And in fact, my father got caught between his parents and never saw his mother again after he was, you could say that he was essentially abducted from Poland, wow. Never to see his mother again. And she was illiterate. There was never a thorough communication of anything that happened, because everything had to go through third parties. But before I digress too far, I realized that each decision to come to this country was also rent with this conflict between those who wanted to break free mm-hmm. and those who wanted desperately, just as desperately, to keep the family intact. So there is this ongoing conflict from one generation to the next. I discovered in my family's experience, and I think in the American experience, between the need to find your niche as an individual, your place, and yet clinging to some sense of community. And the family is, of course, the source of our community connectedness to everything else. And so I wanted to portray that story from one generation to the next, how each of us down the line over the course of a century have struggled to strike that healthy balance between individualism and community integrity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talk about the classic reasons for coming to America, and we think of that as just applying to everybody. Well, they wasn't enough land in the old world, and they needed to come to the new world or whatever. But in the first story you tell, and you kind of break this up by the different lines of your family, I had an opportunity to read this first compelling section, part 1, entitled "The Newcomers." Was this your mother, your father's side of the family?
Both, from Italy and Poland. And chapter 1 is my mother's side of the family, right, called The Great War.
And they were Italian?
Yes.
It was really interesting to hear how many times they crossed the pond before they actually really did settle. So tell the listeners, because I just thought that story alone was worth the cost of the book and reading it, because it was just like, wait a minute, he's going back and now he's coming. I mean, they're world travelers, and and it was when there was just steamships and barely any cars. Tell us about that.
Yes, we never knew this until I started digging around and asking the old aunts and uncles and coming up with the details, because the stories that are passed down is that there was a clean break.
Right.
Well, no. 100 years ago, actually, my mother's side of the family came between 1902 and 1914. It took a period of 12 years for them to make that clean break. So it was not clean.
Not clean at all.
It was exactly comparable to migrant laborers today from south of the border. They come here in search of work so they can support the family back home. They'll come again if work is available and go back home. They'll come again and look for jobs that Americans are unwilling to take. In one case, a company was looking for immigrant laborers in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, to ship to the Midwest, specifically because they knew they could hire immigrants to do this job.
And when they came to get that work, it was not necessarily, oh, I'll come and get a job and then I'll stay. It was the idea, I want to go back with money in my pocket. So it wasn't necessarily, we've already made that complete decision to bring the whole family.
Absolutely.
Lots of separation.